Hi, greetings of the day. Welcome to Dr. D.Y. Patil Unit Exercises Institute of Hotel Management and Catering Technology Pune 33. This presentation is done by Professor Arvind K. Soundcombly. We are going to learn about bakery and confectionery today. Chapter number 5. Flour Pastries.
Chapter 5. Flour Pastries. Topics to be covered in this chapter. 1.1 Introduction, Definition. 1.2 Classification with examples. 1.3 Recipes and methods of preparation. 1.4 Pastry chart. 1.5 Do's and don'ts. Definition. The term pastry comes from the word paste, meaning in this case is a mixture of flour, liquid and fat. Pastry dough has more fat than any other dough. Two important qualities are tenderness and flakiness. The method used to obtain these flakes, layers, is called lamination. Lamination is termed for the process of alternately layering the dough in butter when making pastry. Lamination. It is a process of applying fat in French or English method to the rolled sheet of dough which is folded and used to make flaky, puff and Danish pastries. Rubbing in fat in the flour for short crust pastry. Rubbing in is a technique where fat is rubbed into the flour to make dishes such as short crust pastry, crumbles and scones. Using your fingertips, rub the flour and butter together until the mixture resembles breadcrumbs, fine or coarse, depending on the recipe. Classification of pastries. Various types of pastries are used in the preparation of sweet and savory dishes in the bakery and confectionery. This includes 1. Short crust pastry, examples tarts, pies, barquettes. 2. Choux pastry, examples eclairs, profiteroles, swan. 3. Flaky pastry, examples carré, crème-horns. 4. Puff pastry, examples cheese straw, veg puff, vol au. 5. Danish pastry, examples croissant, Danish pockets, pinwheels. 6. Hot water crust pastry, examples meat pies and pies with savory filling. Tarts. Pies, barquettes. 7. Rough puff pastry, examples pommier, pies. Recipes and methods of preparation of short crust pastry. Short crust pastry is a mixture of flour, fat, sugar, and sometimes eggs and milk. The flour used should be of low gluten. The fat reduces the extensibility of the gluten by shortening the strands of gluten, hence making the pastry short crust. Ingredients. Refined flour 115 grams. Fat 60 grams. Baking powder 1/4 of a teaspoon. Cold water to mix 15 to 30 milliliters. Sugar 15 grams optional. Method. 1. Sieve flour and baking powder. 2. Cut in and then rub in fat lightly with fingertips until it resembles breadcrumbs or sandy texture. 3. Add sugar powder if it is being used and mix well. 4. Sprinkle and mix with cold water to make stiff cracking dough avoiding formation of gluten, and then roll on a floured slab or board and cut as required. 5. Line pastry tins with rolled out dough. Blind baking is done at 205 degrees Celsius for 15 to 20 minutes without filling. Prickling is done so as to avoid puffing of the pastry. Tarts. Apple pie. Barquettes. Choux pastry. The French term for this is pâte aux choux, literally means cabbage, and because the profiteroles and cream puffs made from this pastry resembles little cabbage and therefore named after. Ingredients: refined flour 115 grams, butter 55 grams, eggs 4 nos, water 300 milliliters, icing sugar 115 grams, cocoa 30 grams, water 1 teaspoon. Filling like fresh whipped cream or confectioner's custard can be piped in. Method: 1. Put butter and water into a thick pan and bring to boil, remove from fire, and add sieved flour all at one time. 2. Return to fire and cook on slow flame, beating all the time until mixture leaves the sides of the pan, remove and cool slightly, add beaten eggs, gradually beating all the time to a smooth soft consistency but firm enough to pipe. 3. Pipe through a 1.5 cm, ½ nozzle into fingers about 5 cm, 2 inch, long on a greased and dusted baking tray. 4. Bake in a moderate hot oven 175 to 195 degrees Celsius for 30 to 35 minutes. 5. When baked, do not remove from the oven immediately but let it stand in the oven with the door open, dry baking, for about 10 minutes. To prevent shrinking. 6. Cool and fill as required with cream or confectioner's custard and dip the top in chocolate glaze icing, etc. Eclairs. Profiteroles. Swan. Flaky pastry. Puff and flaky pastry are both remarkable products of bakery. Flaky is an English method of pastry, while puff is a French method. Although similar, they are made with differently laminating and folding methods. The Scottish version in rough puff pastry. Ingredients: refined flour 225 grams, salt ½ teaspoon, lemon juice 1 teaspoon, margarine 170 grams, ice cold water to mix, rice flour for dusting optional, filling as desired optional, egg for coating 1 no. Egg wash. Method: 1. Sieve flour with salt, add water and lemon juice to flour and knead to smoothen soft dough. Keep the dough covered under a wet cloth for at 20 to 25 minutes. 2. Divide the margarine into 3 parts. Roll the dough into a rectangular shape. Apply one part of the margarine in on 2/3 of the rectangle rolled sheet, leaving 1.5 cm, edges all around. 3. Fold into 3. Folding an empty portion first, repeat process twice more to use up all the margarine and once without applying margarine. 4. Rest the pastry wrapped in grease-proof paper in a cool place in fridge, for at least 45 minutes. Roll, cut and place the pastry on a water baking sheet. Brush with egg yolk before baking. 5. Bake first at 230 degrees Celsius for about 10 minutes, take out cool. Bake again for 30 minutes at 150 degrees Celsius till the inner layers are done. Curry. Cream horns. Puff pastry. Puff pastry is the richest and lightest of all pastries. It has equal amounts of fat and flour as a ratio 1:1. Puff is referred to as the French method of making pastry. Ingredients: refined flour 450 grams, lemon juice 2 teaspoons, margarine 450 grams, salt 1 teaspoon. Filling as desired. Egg for coating to no optional. Method: 1. Sieve the flour with salt, add cold water and lemon juice to flour and knead to smoothen soft dough. Keep the dough covered under a wet cloth for 30 to 35 minutes. 2. Cream fat and keep aside, divide in 3 portions in French method of making pastry. 3. Roll the dough into a rectangular shape and apply 2/3 portion with 1/3 part of fat, fold so as to laminate each side, being careful not to let the fat ooze/escape out. 4. Rest the pastry into refrigerator at least 15 minutes, repeat the same process for 2 times more, resting it for 15 minutes after each rolling. 5. Let it rest for 1 hour after the final rolling. 6. Roll, Cut and put on watered tray. 7. Brush with egg and bake at 230 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes or as it browns, and then bake at 150 degrees Celsius for about 30–40 minutes so as inner layers bake. Rough puff pastry. Also known as quick pastry, which is made using a quick and simpler method, it is prepared by incorporating butter in the form of golf-sized balls into the dough instead of entire slabs of butter used in traditional puff pastry, followed by sheeting and folding or no resting time between successive folds. The main difference between rough puff and puff pastry is the method and layers obtained during folding. There will be more layers in puff pastry. Puff pastry is more flakier than rough puff pastry. Ingredients for puff pastry and rough puff pastry can be similar in terms of quantity, whereas method may vary a bit. Method. Ingredient scaling, metering. Mixing dry ingredients and butter cubes on low speed to maintain the butter pieces intact. Add liquids and mix until a rough dough is formed, allowing the dough to rest for about 20 minutes. Sheeting the dough to the desired thickness. Folding into 4 or 5 single folds. For the first 2 folds, rest the dough for 20 minutes followed by another set of 3 and 4 folds, allowing the dough to further rest for 20 to 30 minutes. Since there is no roll-in step, the dough can directly be sheeted out into the required thickness. A series of sheeting and folding steps follow to generate the required number of layers. Folding can be accomplished in many ways. The dough may be cut and placed over another piece of dough or can be moved back and forth over a slow-moving conveyor, dough sheeter, resulting in the dough overlapping. Once the desired number of layers is achieved, the dough is then sheeted down to around 0.60–0.8 inches and packaged. Rough puff pastry dough. It does not have laminated layers. Comparison between rough puff and puff pastry. Rough puff pastry is light, crispy, but has less layers, flakes, compared to puff pastry. Puff pastry is lighter and flakier than rough puff pastry. Cheese straws vegetable puff. Wall au vin. Danish pastry. Danish pastry is rich, sweet and fermented dough. It is soft dough made with flour and a ferment of yeast, sugar, eggs and milk. Ingredients. Refined flour 450 grams. Salt 1 teaspoon. Egg 1 no. Egg for brushing 1 no. Sugar powder 4 tablespoons. Milk 300 milliliters. Margarine 310 plus 30 grams. Dry yeast 15 grams. Sugar syrup. Sugar 30 grams. Water 60 milliliters. Method. 1. Mix yeast and lukewarm milk and keep aside. 2. Sieve flour, sugar, and salt, rub in 30 grams of margarine into the flour. 3. Add yeast, ferment in the flour, knead a smooth and fairly soft dough, and roll the dough into the rectangle. 4. Divide the remaining margarine into 3 equal portions. 5. Spread 1 portion of creamed margarine on 3/4 of the rectangle. 6. Fold, empty portion first, into 3 layers overlapping. Repeat the same process 2 times till all the margarine is folded in. 7. Rest the pastry for about 15 minutes after each lamination. Roll and shape as required. 8. Bake the pastry after shaping on lightly greased and dusted tray and proof it for 20 minutes. Give it an egg wash and bake it at 220 degrees Celsius for 15–20 minutes or till done. 9. Finally brushed with sugar syrup. Croissant Danish pocket. Pinwheel. Exploring a croissant. Crisp flaky crust. Distinct butter taste. Airy crumb with visible layers. Visible layers.
Hot water crust pastry. This is also known as the cook pastry. It is lean dough made by cooking the salt, flour and a little fat in water to a paste on slow flame. Ingredients: refined flour 450 g, salt 1 teaspoon, lard, butter 115 g, water 600 ml, egg to glaze, savory filling 450 g.
Method 1. Put fat and water into a pan and bring to boil to pour it in center of sieved flour and salt. Make quickly into dough with wooden spoon. 3. Turn onto a slightly floured board and knead until the paste is smooth and free from cracks. Keep pastry warm in a bowl covered with cloth. 4. Mold a portion of the paste with the fingers to form a pie case. It becomes firm when cold and keeps it in shape. 5. Fill with savory filling. Seal it with a lid made from another portion of the pastry. Dampen the edges of the pastry and pinch firmly together. 6. Make a hole or chimney in the center to allow the steam to escape. 7. Glaze the pie with beaten eggs. Bake at 230 degrees Celsius till pastries is brown and set. Reduce the heat and cook for 40 minutes. Do's and don'ts while preparing pastry. 1. Short crust pastry. First and most important is that all the ingredients and utensils should be as cool as possible. This keeps the fat hard, for if it becomes warm at all it will short to oil in the fingers and is then difficult to rub into the flour, so the mixture becomes heavy instead of being light and airy. The next important point is to add a minimum of water, only just enough to make the pastry of rollable consistency. Too much liquid and variable makes pastry tough. The oven must be hot for the first few minutes of baking, for the heat bursts the flour grains which will absorb the melting fat. If it's too cool, the fat will ooze out of pastry before there is sufficient heat for the flour grains to burst. Excess stretching during rolling should be avoided as it results in shrunken pastry. The filling in the product should not be too moist as it results in soggy pastry. 2. Choux pastry. All ingredients should be scaled accurately. When the flour is added at one time to hot water and fat mixture, it should be vigorously stirred with wooden spoon on a slow flame. When the lump is formed, take it off the flame. Add the eggs to cooled flour fat water mixture, the soft dough. Choux pastry should be baked at 200 degrees Celsius so as to achieve maximum rise. As it browns, allow it to dry. Bake just to try out the shell to obtain the crisp and brittle texture. During baking, the products should not be subjected to unnecessary moments, otherwise the structure will collapse. 3. Flaky pastry. All the ingredients should be scaled accurately. The fat should be cream into homogeneous mass. The dough is to be rested or refrigerated after every fold sessions for the gluten to relax and fat to harden. The baking sheet should be always sprinkled with water before putting it in the oven. Do not overhandle the dough. 4. Puff pastry. Scale and prepare dough strictly according to the formula. When butter or shortening is rolled into the dough, it must be the same consistency each time, as the dough sheet will result in one is stiffer than the other. In warm climate, the dough should be kept under refrigeration after it is rolled and laminated. Care must be taken to make sure every particle of margarine or butter is evenly distributed through the dough. All excess flour should be brushed off before folding the dough. 5. Danish pastry. The ingredients should be scaled accurately as per the recipe. The flying ferment should be activated while adding to the dough. The dough made should not be too soft, it should be workable. The dough should be knocked back after resting initially before rolling. Following the lamination procedure in 2 slots, in quick succession, keeping it chilled, avoiding rising of the dough. Shape it, proof it and bake it. The pastry should be brushed with sugar syrup after baking when it is hot. 6. Hot water crust pastry. When the flour is mixed with hot fat and water, it should be quickly made to the dough. The dough should be free from cracks and smooth. The pastry dough should be kept warm, covered with a cloth. During baking, the pastry or pie should be baked at 230 degrees Celsius till brown and set. Then the temperature should be reduced and wait till the filling cooks.
Thank you.